Looking forward to this one. So we're going to talk about all of your research that went into the telepathy tapes, and then we started going down more and saw that you were into some of the researching some of the ESP remote viewing, your book, and all that stuff. And I've interviewed a bunch of these guys and women: Angela Ford, Joe McMoneagle, Sean Webb, Skip Atwater, Edwin May. If I'm forgetting anyone, please forgive me, but we've been on a roll with this, and it's just something that caught my attention probably about 2-3 years ago, and just a fascinating subject. So I'm really excited to have you here. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
But all right, so everybody starts off with an introduction here. Ready? Mm-hmm. Let me know if I'm missing anything. I'm sure I am. Dr. Diane Hennacy, a Johns Hopkins trained neuropsychiatrist with over 30 years of clinical experience. Served on the faculty at Harvard Medical School, a member of a think tank on human consciousness at the Salk Institute. What is the Salk Institute?
It's an institute it's a scientific institute in San Diego.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of famous people have been there, named after Jonas Salk.
Okay. An integrative medical doctor, psychotherapist, and public speaker who bridges rigorous science with explorations of extraordinary human abilities, including psychic phenomena. Author of the ESP Enigma, The Scientific Case for Psychic Phenomena, a book that examines the neuroscience behind ESP and telepathy. A pioneering researcher known for studying telepathic communication in nonverbal autistic individuals and savants. A co-founder of Human Rights Initiatives, a student of ancient wisdom traditions, and an advocate for expanding our understanding of human potential through evidence-based inquiry. The primary expert whose research was featured in the Telepathy Tapes podcasts. Am I missing anything?
Oh, there's a lot more. I've also done a lot of work in PTSD.
Have you really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. Well, we should definitely talk about that, because we talk about that more than any other subject on the show.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, when I started this, it was all, I don't know if you know much about me. I was a former Navy SEAL and CIA contractor. And so when I started this, I was bringing on all my colleagues and to talk about their life stories. And we always end with getting over PTS, traumatic brain injury, stuff like that. And we explore lots of different avenues to try to get out of that pattern. And so, yeah, I would love to chat with you about that stuff at the end. What got you into PTSD?
Well, when I first went into private practice, autism was so rare that when I, hung my shingle and said, I'm a neuropsychiatrist with expertise in autism, there wasn't enough of it to fill my practice. But what happened is that there were all of these women who had been sexually abused as children, who were really frustrated by their experience with the psychiatrist that they were seeing, who didn't really understand really didn't understand why they were so traumatized and just wanted to medicate them. And I quickly gained the reputation as somebody who would actually approach them with compassion and care and really try to help them. And so what happened is that I became an expert on severe trauma, because, some of these women had their own parents sort of sending them off to have sex with strangers. Basically pimping them out when they're 3, 4, 5 years old. And it's such a betrayal that it's really hard. We can live with the trauma from a natural disaster like a hurricane that comes moving through, or an earthquake, because that doesn't really, it traumatizes us to lose loved ones and et cetera. But when you have a trauma that's a betrayal by someone that you innately are supposed to be able to trust, it's just such a deep wound. And so I started working with these women and created a program for a women's center in Chula Vista,
Man, good for you.
and really helped a tremendous number of women, and stopped doing that when insurance companies started altering inpatient psychiatry, and they started just wanting it to become more like a revolving door. And I said, no, I'm not going to have my name attached to something that is not consistent with the kind of values that I have. I mean, I will only put my name on something that is top notch. But what happened is that I had this expertise in PTSD, and I was approached by somebody who asked me if I would help create a program for survivors of torture, incorporated in San Diego. And they were just starting up. And so I agreed to help them with their program. And we worked with asylum seekers and refugees from all around the world, including people who were from the genocide in Burundi and Rwanda, the Lost Boys of Sudan, human rights activists who had been tortured in Islamic countries like Iraq, et cetera. And then in addition to that, I also worked with people who were veterans from all of the different wars. And I didn't do that at Survivors of Torture. I did that just in my own private practice because there were a number of people who were veterans who were not getting their benefits because there was such a long waiting list for them to be evaluated by somebody who could evaluate them for traumatic brain injury and PTSD. And so I agreed to do that as an independent contractor. So I've heard it all pretty much.
Wow. You've explored some serious dark territory.
I have, yes.
You know, we're going to get into the telepathy stuff, but I've interviewed countless. I didn't realize how prevalent sexual abuse was, especially in kids, until I started the show. And like I mentioned, we do a lot of life stories here. And, some of them have come out on the show and said it. Some of them have told me after the show that things have happened when they were kids and they didn't want that out there. And I'll bet it's close to 50% of the people I've interviewed have experienced some sort of sexual trauma as a child. Now, you're talking about 3 to 5 years old. So what I want to ask is if there are any, which it doesn't sound like. I mean, if somebody's going to pimp their kid out like that, it's going to happen multiple times. But, have you worked with anybody that had a single experience at that age, an unfortunate experience like sexual trauma in a single experience? And if you have, I mean, obviously they remember that, but I mean.
Well, I've worked with people who've had the single experiences as a teenager.
As a teenager?
Yeah. The ones that had the experiences when they were really young, it generally was a repeat experience.
Is that their first memory?
I wouldn't say it's their first memory, but I'd say it's their most vivid.
Man, that's sad.
It's very sad. And what happens is that it makes it really, really difficult to have normal relationships.
Yeah, I see that a lot with women that have been through something like that who are adults now, and it seems like they get attracted almost to that type of a person, to an abusive type person.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really been something that I've observed over and over again, where there'll be these women who were sexually abused as a child, and then they marry somebody who ends up sexually abusing their own children. And yet when they marry this person, they don't have any suspicion at all that this person would do that. Somehow it's like people can be like a magnet almost.
Like telepathy. Like some type of telepathy. Some type of communication that they don't even understand that's happening.
Well, what's interesting is that, it's almost like people have a radar. that a system that's unconscious. I mean, like they say that, for example, if you had a party with a bunch of people in it that were single, that the sadist and the masochist will somehow find one another.
The what?
So somebody who's a masochist and the person who's sadistic, they will somehow find one another. It's as though they're like two opposites, two ends of that polarity are really on the same continuum. And somehow it's like they gravitate towards one another. I mean, a similar phenomena is that, like I noticed when I was doing inpatient psychiatry, that people with the same diagnosis would gravitate towards one another. And you could, if you had like a mixed unit, you would find that people who, for example, were depressed they'd find one another and they'd be talking with one another. And the people who had a personality disorder, they'd be with one another. And the people who were schizophrenic, they'd be talking with one another. And the people who were bipolar, they'd be talking with one another. And it's that sort of birds of a feather flock together kind of a phenomena. And so there's some kind of unconscious process in which people are just attracted.
Wow.
And attract to them. And I think that the solution to that is for us to really explore our unconscious. Because if you can take that which you're not conscious of and bring it to conscious awareness, then you have more mastery over it. And you don't fall into some of these old traps that you do if you're just sort of ignoring something, or you never even allow it to enter your awareness.
Two questions to come out of that. One is about generational trauma. We'll get to that in just a second. But you had mentioned exploring the unconsciousness. How do you do that?
Well, one of the ways is to keep a dream diary, because our dreams are really our unconscious talking to us.
How so? I mean, I've had some wild dreams. Wild dreams. They make no sense. Or, when I dream, I'm fascinated with dreams. I don't dream a whole lot, but I mean, so what is a dream? I mean, you have these dreams and it's like 1 minute you're in a street fight and then the next minute you're eating pizza with your family. And then the next minute you're, I don't know, on vacation, going to like what I'm kind of saying is you get these dreams that seem to last. I mean, sometimes they seem to last all night, and then but you can't when I try to describe it to my wife, I'm like, I don't know how we went from this scenario with these emotions to something completely different and a whole nother scenario with a whole different set of emotions into, I mean, you're happy, you're angry, you're sad, you're sorry, dreams that maybe, I don't know, you got in a fight with your wife or your wife cheated on you or, I mean, or you're mad at your kid. I mean, it's, what I'm saying is you get like this movie, if you will, in your dream, but it doesn't flow. And so it's all these different subjects and emotions and scenarios that all happen within one dream. Why does that happen?
Well, it's during our dreaming state that we're really trying to process emotions and lay down memory. And so when for example, some people have recurrent dreams, and I pay a lot of attention to somebody's recurrent dreams because that's something that you're really, really trying to work through. And some people's dreams are more transparent. It's more obvious what the dream is really about if you apply it to, what's going on in their waking life. But other people's dreams are more encoded in symbols. And the more deeply encoded they are, the more it is that the person can't really face on. And so it's like you're dealing with it in code first. And then as the layers come off, you're able to see more about what the dream really is about.
Could you go into a little more detail on that? I mean, how do you decode a dream?
Well, it's something I've done as a skilled psychotherapist. How do I decode it? When I listen to the dream, I want to know what emotion first of all, what emotion came up in the dream. Okay. So, let's say somebody said, oh, I felt really sad or I felt really scared. And I'd say, okay, is there anything that's going on in your life that feels, or that you've been thinking about lately, that feels at all like that emotion? I mean, that would be an echo of it. And they say, oh yeah, I had this anxiety dream, and I'm feeling a little anxious in my new job, or I'm feeling a little anxious because my wife isn't acting the same way, and I'm wondering if something's going on, or so, and then you just keep exploring that, and you get into what in your life is similar to this, and then it just takes you down this pathway where you start to realize, oh, now you're thinking about this, but actually your dream is about something that happened to you before. So let's say a person has a dream in which they're very anxious. They say, oh, I've been wondering if my wife's, having an affair. And then you get into, oh, this person was married before and their wife did have an affair. And then you start to unpack that. And so it's, and there's certain things that become, just become obvious that's what they are. I'm trying to, like an example of a dream, there was a time in my life when I would have a dream in which I'm driving a car and the brakes don't work. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, that is a dream where it just feels like you don't have control over your life. That's like, well, what's going on in your life that you don't feel control over? That's a good example.
Okay. Yeah, it's just interesting because I have I have zero fear that my wife is going to cheat on me. But it's just, and that's just one example, but I may have a dream where I lost my son at the store and I think he got kidnapped, or I have a dream where one of my best friends killed somebody and am I going to help him hide the body? Or you know what I mean? Like, it's just like wazoo shit that just pops in my head. And it's like, what does this have to do with anything? Like, I don't have a fear of that. I don't know why. I had a dream about somebody kidnapping my kids at Walmart.
It may be, to some extent, it may be that you're trying to process things that aren't personal. In other words, we hear in the news all the time about these horror stories. And so then what happens is that, there's this human tendency to then try that on. As a way of just trying to reconcile that we live in a world in which these kinds of things are even possible. And so sometimes our dreams are like a rehearsal. It's sort of, we're trying it on so that in case something like that did happen, that we feel prepared for it. It's like you're a former Navy SEAL. You had to try on scenarios in your training for combat. Mm-hmm. And so some of these things may be just, it's not that you have a fear of it. It's that you acknowledge that we live in a world in which those kinds of things can happen and that you have a need to feel prepared. And what's fascinating is that dreams oftentimes are places where people who normally aren't psychic or don't consider themselves psychic can actually have these experiences that are precognitive or telepathic. And I remember reading this account once of this dream that somebody had in which they worked in a chemistry lab, and their eyes, that a chemical went into their eyes, and it was going to destroy their eyeballs unless they went over into get their eyes washed. We had these stations where you would go in case something like that happened. And he had a dream of that happening to him, and then recurrent dream of that happening to him. And then years later when it happened, he was able to get to the station faster because he had already rehearsed it in his mind.
Wow. Do you think that, I mean, do you think that some dreams are a representation of your true self? And so where I'm going with this is I'll just bring up some more examples. I'm just curious of your thoughts. But I mean, you know, when I was in the teams and contracting for CIA and all this other stuff, I mean, I would have dreams where we'd be in the middle of a gunfight and I would rise to the occasion and I would be, you know, doing everything I'm supposed to do, heroic actions, all this other stuff. And then I might have a dream where I cower away and I wake up and I'm like ashamed of myself. Or, you know, or it could be a street fight where, you know, one dream, I don't know, defend my family, you know, from some type of an assailant. And then I may have another dream where it's, you know, not the exact same scenario, but it might be a similar scenario. And I didn't defend them. And I'll wake up from some of those feeling either proud of my actions or ashamed. And if I'm ashamed, then I'm like, you know, if I wake up and feel ashamed from it, I'm like, man, that's not who I am. Or it could be anything. It could be, you know, it could be, I don't know, a dream where you do something bad and then you think, oh man, I'm not capable of doing that to somebody. Why would, you know, I've never have done anything like this to somebody, you know, and I always would like to think that, yeah, I'm going to stand up for my family or for my friends or for my, you know, when I, in my other life, you know, my former colleagues in battle. And so, I mean, so where I'm going is, do you think dreams are a direct representation of who you are?
In this case about you, I would say you must have a very, very highly developed superego. And what I mean by superego is your conscience. You're somebody that holds yourself to very, very, very high standards. And so part of how we hold ourselves to high principles is that it's criticism, reward, criticism, reward. It's like you. So what you're doing is it's like you're being hard on yourself to keep yourself in line, and you would never do some of the things that you feel shameful about in your dreams. You would never do those things in your waking life, and part of what keeps you along that sort of straight and narrow is that you're always reminding yourself of how you would feel if you didn't. And it keeps you on task.
Interesting. So it's like your subconscious.
That's what I mean by it. It's your unconscious. It's your unconscious that is, you know, that's at play here. That's why I was saying that dreams are really about our unconscious.
Interesting. All right, let's go to generational trauma and or cycles. You know, back to kids that have been, you know, had horrific traumatic events happen. You know, sexual abuse, physical abuse. I mean, how does somebody break that cycle that plays in their head over and over and over?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about generational trauma is that people can have that, they can express it without ever having been exposed to the generations that actually had the experiences. So what I mean by that is that there are individuals who were adopted who were the children and grandchildren of people who were in the Holocaust. And even though they were adopted at birth, had no, you know, exposure to parents who were traumatized by what happened, the child was anxious from the get-go. And one of the theories about what this, what the cause of this is, or how this happens, is that there's epigenetics as a result. We inherit not just our genes, we inherit the control switches for the genes. So the genetics, the genes that code for proteins are only about 10% of our chromosomes. The other 90% of our chromosomes are thought to be what really controls the expression of those genes. And so certain genes can get turned on and get turned off. And so what's happening there is you're inheriting this sort of, for lack of a better word, it's almost like a memory without it having an actual memory. But I mean, you're inheriting that. Well, the good news is that we can do things to turn back on genes that were turned off and turn off genes that were turned on. We can alter the epigenetics.
You can do that?
Oh yeah, we can do that. Absolutely. I mean, that's our, things like our diet, things like psychotherapy, things like, just doing meditation, doing all of these different sort of practices actually changes our epigenetics. And we can then pass that down to the future generations. It's one of the reasons why I think it's so important for people to really undergo healing of themselves so that they don't pass the things down. Because even if you're really being careful about what you say or what you do, etc., our children, if we haven't really worked on certain things, they still can inherit some of what we haven't processed yet.
Interesting. Another random question about autism. You had mentioned that at the beginning of your practice, you were really focused on autistic people, and that there wasn't enough of that to fill your practice. Well, I don't know when that was, but let's fast forward. It seems like, I wouldn't say autism is exploding, but the numbers have gone up. Is there something that we as a species is doing wrong, or is it an overdiagnosis, or have doctors picked up on on signs that is the spectrum widened, to where there's different levels now? I mean, why are we seeing this rise? And
Well, when I first started studying autism, which was back in 1986, 1987, it was only about 1 in 10,000 children, and now it's 1 in 30.
1 in 30?
1 in 30.
Wow.
And what we have to realize is that our brains are still developing throughout childhood. Mm-hmm. And we've introduced all of these artificial factors into our world without having really studied what effect they might have on brain development. Everything from an increased C-section rate, ultrasound during pregnancy, changes in the diet, which change the microbiome, which we know plays a huge role in neurotransmitters. Also, we've introduced all of these, Wi-Fi and various electromagnetic fields that are not natural to the Earth. There's all of these chemicals. I mean, when babies are born, there's tens of thousands of chemicals in the umbilical blood. And so they're being exposed to all these chemicals. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that the placenta does not filter out chemicals. It actually concentrates them in the fetus. Just one of the reasons why I'm a big proponent of women who want to become pregnant undergoing some kind of just cleansing, some kind of detox. I mean, it's not really enough to just not take anything during your pregnancy. I mean, you really need to, all of the beauty products, nail polish, makeup, all of these just artificial chemicals, we absorb them through our skin. And so I think that it's really, it's a matter of, we've introduced a lot of things into the world that are, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. Okay. And so what we need to do is we need to find ways in which we can optimize our health and keep those things that we feel are essential. And those things that are not essential, such as, like, for example, the use of glyphosate in so much of our agriculture. I mean, that's a known toxin. And it's not only toxic to our system, but it also is toxic to our gut bacteria. So anyway, there's just there's so many factors that are at play here, and it's one of the reasons why it's been hard for anybody to pinpoint that it's one single factor, because it's really probably multifactorial.
So it's not overdiagnosis.
No, it's definitely not overdiagnosis. No.
Do you think that there are aspects of autism that are a gift?
Absolutely.
What are those aspects?
Well, one of the things is that people who are autistic have a different type of cognitive process. They tend to be really superior pattern recognizers, which is, they're able to connect the dots. They're able to see the associations of things. And some of them are visual spatial thinkers, so they're able to process things. And once again, it's relational, but it's different from pattern recognition. So an example would be, so people who are visual spatial thinkers make great engineers. They can design something in their mind and manipulate it within their mind before they even build it. They can, sort of debug all of the problems. Nikola Tesla was somebody who could do that. And so that type of thinking is extremely efficient at solving a lot of problems versus verbal thinking, which is what most neurotypical people are, is they think in words, they think in language. And the problem with language is it's very linear. And it also can be very, very circular. So you just go and looping around in the same thoughts. The other thing about language is this language can also be very deceptive. We can talk ourselves into or talk other people into believing something that really isn't true, all through language. Whereas with these other processing styles, the right brain processing styles, it's more that it's more like pure perception. It's more of a that you're, and it's harder to be deceived because you can just you're seeing how things plug into everything else, as opposed to just following a sort of a linear logic train that somebody is leading you to wherever they want to lead you. Now, those are just some of the gifts, and then there are many other gifts. I mean, many of the individuals that I've worked with who are autistic, there's a purity about them. There's an honesty about them. And there is a deeply spiritual aspect to them. So there's many, many gifts. And many of the mothers of these children are delighted that they have an autistic child. They really, they get upset if somebody says anything that suggests that they feel sorry for them.
I've spent years on this show pulling back the curtain and trying to reveal what's really happening in this country. And the truth is, there's a double standard here in America. You see time and time again people defending themselves, defending their family, and then the judicial system goes after them. It's a double standard. And if you don't believe me, check out episode number 3 with Don Bradley. That is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Because it's not just about what you did, believe it or not. It's how the legal system interprets it. And that's why I'm a USCCA member. The USCCA has over 860,000 members because they know the reality is after you stop the threat, the real fight begins. Your membership gives you the education, elite training, and self-defense liability insurance you need for the second fight, the legal one. Plus, every member also gets access to a 24/7 critical response team and attorney network in the event of a self-defense incident. Violent crime happens too often in America. This isn't about living in fear. This is about being prepared when things go sideways. You don't get to schedule danger, and with the world changing so fast, you have to do what you can to protect your family. Check out the USCCA's risk-free membership at uscca.com/SRS. That's uscca.com/SRS. Protect more than just your life, protect your future. Go right now to uscca.com/SRS. According to new reports, central banks around the world may be buying twice as much gold as official numbers suggest. You heard that right. Twice as much. And get this, some are bypassing the traditional markets and buying gold directly from miners in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. That means no US dollars, just straight physical gold. The shift isn't just symbolic, it could be strategic. They could be looking to bypass Western financial systems. So if central banks are scrambling to reduce their dollar exposure and hold more physical gold, should you do the same? That's where the award-winning precious metals company Goldco comes in. Right now, you can get a free 2025 gold and silver kit and learn more about how gold and silver can help you protect your savings. And all you have to do is visit SeanLikesGold.com. Plus, if you qualify, you could get up to 10% back in bonus silver just for getting started. Go to SeanLikesGold.com. That's SeanLikesGold.com. Performance may vary. You should always consult with your financial and tax professional. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too because you see so many ultra successful people in for example, in the tech world, that are tech giants who appear to be very much so on that type of a spectrum. Or, you look at something like, have you ever seen that movie, The Big Short? I think his name's Michael Berry. He's the one that called the 2008 crash of the market, the economy. And you look at, in the movie, it looks like they portray him as somebody who would definitely fall on the spectrum. For somebody, it's just, and everybody thought he was crazy, and then bam, market tanked, and it's like, shit, the guy was right. But you see it all over the tech world, and it just seems like, some of the most fascinating innovators in the world all seem to kind of fall in that type of category.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because when I was in college, there were the sort of the engineering types that were, they were called, nerds, and they had the, pocket calculators, and, they were, kind of, people made fun of them. And then those kinds of people are now the crypto billionaires.
I know that's,
and have all of these gorgeous women, they're just lining up to be with them. So, it's talk about revenge of the nerds.
That's a good way to put it. But it's it's an interesting, very interesting subject to kind of dissect. And so, you were talking about language, and I remember when I interviewed, language seems to be a very inefficient way to communicate.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons why more and more people are losing their tolerance for reading. They'd rather watch a podcast like this.
I mean, I had a conversation with Joe McMonagle about, how does this happen? How does remote viewing, ESP abilities, how do they come about? And I think he had mentioned that he thinks that we all have it, but we all can't tap into it. And so he went on, and this is just a theory. I don't think there's any science behind this, but he did bring up a good point, and he talked about at the beginning of humanity, he's like, there was no language. He's like, if you look at animals, they're able to communicate extremely efficiently without words. And he goes, at the beginning, this is how we communicated, was body language. It was, you really wouldn't have to do much, maybe grunt, point at something, but you could read each other and communicate a lot more efficiently. And then when we started traveling in groups, and that it would be, then we started to introduce language, and he goes, language is actually a very inefficient way to communicate. There's a lot of opportunities for miscommunication, or you insert sarcasm and all this other stuff, and I just found that to be very interesting. And he went on to go, through tech, through social media, we're looking at a phone, we're looking at a TV. He's like, we're not accessing, everything that our brains were meant to do. And it's been, kind of if you look at a graph, he's like, it goes down, and so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, absolutely. That language. So one of the things that I think plays a huge role in why these autistic individuals that I do research with, why they're so telepathic, is that they underwent a regression. Most of them underwent a regression between the ages of 1 and 2.5 years old, right when they were acquiring language. And that's also the time period when we undergo developmentally individuation separation. In other words, people talk about the terrible twos, the terrible threes, and part of that is because you have the toddler is trying to assert their independence from the parent, and they say no to everything, even if it's something they want, right? And so it's because they're just they're testing out their ability to have free will. And so what happens, though, with these autistic individuals is that they regress during that time period when they're acquiring language and they're becoming more autonomous from the parent. And so they become more and more dependent upon the parent for a lot of basic needs. And so they never go through the separation that those of us who are neurotypical go through. And so they stay in kind of more of a shared consciousness with the family members. And I believe that we're all born in that shared consciousness, and that's part of how we acquire language in the first place. I mean, if you think about how magical it is that a young child can pick up language and know what it is that people are talking about. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. I mean, when you meet some of these children that, there's some children that at the age of 2, they can speak in full paragraphs. And it's like, how do you take these sounds that you hear? And the sounds, from everybody sound slightly different because we all have different voices. People have different accents, etc. How do we take that and convert it into actual concepts? So I think what happens is that we all have that shared consciousness so that we pair those sounds and the patterns within them, which is, the information. We pair that with whatever it is that the person who's speaking is thinking. And then as we develop language, then the telepathy goes underground. And it's really more of our default kind of, proto-language, if you will. One of the things that's interesting is that if you look at brain development, when we're born, there's a pathway for language that's intact, that it's what the pathway that's called the ventral pathway that's involved in the understanding of language. And it's not until we're 7 years old that we've completed the development of the dorsal language pathway, which is the pathway that enables the expression of language. And that's the pathway that gets disrupted in these children who regress during this first few years of life. And that pathway is connecting the front of the brain, an area called Broca's area, which is the expression of language. It's also, and the expression of language is not just speech, it's also the ability to write or type. It's also the area of the brain that's involved in the use of tools. And so by having that not get hooked up to the part of the brain that's involved in the understanding of language, it makes it hard for people to express what they already know in these individuals. Now, what's interesting is that and this is all in the left hemisphere. That's basically the language is for most people, right-handed people especially, it's encoded in the left hemisphere. What's interesting is that one of the reasons why I thought that autistic individuals might be the ones most likely to show us that ESP is real is that I realized that their brain activity when they're in their waking state is more similar to our functionality when we're in dreaming sleep. And as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes people can have psychic dreams who aren't otherwise psychic. And if you look at what's going on, the activity in the brain during dreaming sleep, what you'll see is that the right hemisphere is dominant and the left hemisphere is quiescent. And the frontal lobes are quiet. And in children, our frontal lobes aren't as fully hooked up to the rest of the brain, okay, which is why, we're all kind of ADD when we're little because our frontal lobes aren't hooked up. So we don't have impulse control or we can't think of the consequences. And in these autistic individuals, they have all of these right hemisphere skills. As I mentioned, their cognitive processes are more right hemisphere based. And a lot of savant skills are right hemisphere, and their deficits are left hemisphere, language. And so they have this kind of reversal of brain functioning when they're awake from what we have when we're awake, but that we all experience when we're dreaming sleep. And so I made this hypothesis over 20 years ago that autistic individuals might be the ones who'd be the most likely to express ESP. And I knew that a lot of savant abilities were very similar to ESP. Well, what's happened a couple of years ago is that the head of neurology at the University of Toronto, Maurice Friedman, did an experiment in which he inhibited the left frontal lobe of individuals who were just neurotypical individuals, and he found that enhanced their abilities for telepathy and for psychokinesis, which is the ability of the mind to affect the material world.
Like spoon bending.
Yeah, like spoon bending. Yeah. And
wow.
So that's yeah. So that's the reason why I think that these non-speaking autistic individuals, their brain activity is consistent with what that study shows.
Have you seen psychokinesis in real time?
I've seen people able to affect random number generators, which is a form of psychokinesis. But I haven't in real time. I haven't been to a spoon bending party, but I know a lot of people who have. I know a lot of people who've bent spoons.
What do you mean by Sorry, what did you call it? Basic randomized numbers.
Oh, a random number generator?
How do they affect that?
Well, so a lot of random number generators, how they operate is that it's basically based on radioactive decay, which is a random process. And we know that, there's just a certain, we have a lot of data on what that looks like. Okay. And it's just random. There's no predicting any of it. Okay. And so if you have a random number generator, it's just measuring that radioactive decay. But then you say to somebody, okay, I want you to now influence that so it's less random. And then you just measure the output and you see that it has shifted towards something that's more coherent. There were experiments that were done by Roger Nelson and others at Princeton in which they had random number generators all over the world. And what they looked at is what effect does collective consciousness have on those random number generators? If everybody is focusing on the same thing, if everybody is simultaneously having the same thought, does that create more of a coherence in that which is just a natural random process? And what they found was, yes, indeed, it does. And how they did the experiment was that they had all of this data of these random number generators just, putting their output out. And then they looked at time periods when a high percentage of people were focused on the same thing. So what would those things be? The O.J. Simpson trial. So many people were tuning into the O.J. Simpson trial that there was increased coherency in the random number generators.
Wow.
They did this for many, many big events like that.
Wow. How do you describe collective consciousness?
How do I describe that?
Yeah.
What I would say is that so all of us are basically, I would say we're differentiated consciousness in terms of, we're each our own individual consciousness, but we're still connected or capable of being connected to a unified consciousness. There are people who have these mystical experiences that say that they realize everything is all one, that it's all unity, that we're not separate. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that consciousness where it's like you go up to, whatever you want to call it, source, whatever you want to label that, it's all of our higher consciousness all collectively together.
I've had that experience.
Of unity consciousness?
Yes. All is one. It was a psychedelic experience, 5-MeO, DMT. And it was a very profound feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were going from the more differentiated individual consciousness to the collective. And we all are capable of that. It's just that some people need to have, a chemical push.
Why do you, what happens in the brain when that happens on psychedelics?
What happens in the brain? Well, I don't know exactly when you say what happens in the brain, I don't know exactly what's happening. It's something I want to study. Mm-hmm. I think of it as, for example, think of it as being like a So are you familiar with the concept of the biofield?
No, I'm not.
Okay. So all living all living systems have a field around them. Okay. It's an electromagnetic field. Okay. And within that is plasma. And it has a toroidal shape. And the torus it's sort of like a donut. Okay. And it's a self-reflecting system. Think of if you've ever looked at an electromagnetic field, or looked at the field around the Earth, okay? It's toroidal. And it loops around like this, okay? And we spend most of our time in our individuated consciousness focusing on just the information that's coming to us from our sensory system. Okay, that's informed by, our sight, our hearing, et cetera, that is really our local, here and now senses.
Okay.
But what happens is, so that's only some of the information that's within that toroidal field. I believe that field contains information that is relevant to us here, but out on the outside here, it's getting information from elsewhere. If that makes sense. It's like think of it as being, there's our inner process. Okay, there's what you experience internally that feels more private, okay? And when we go, and that's local consciousness, but when we access non-local consciousness, like what the remote viewers are doing, it's like our conscious awareness shifts from paying attention to just the readout from what our senses, our local senses are telling us, to shifting to the I think of it as the outside of that torus. It shifts to that which is not informed by our senses anymore, but is actually informed by the greater field.
Okay.
So I don't think of consciousness as being confined to the brain. In fact, I think of consciousness as being something that the brain navigates.
Okay.
Like we all have, we all have like smartphones nowadays. And so we use our smartphone to connect with other people and to connect and to surf the internet. And the information isn't contained within the smartphone. The information is contained within the field. And so I think that our brains and consciousness work similarly, that our consciousness is actually a field. And there are some psychics who actually see these fields
like
around
a cloud,
us.
like a collective cloud.
They see it like they see, well, they also will see like your field. Okay, there are people who see auras. These autistic individuals I work with, they see auras. So they see your consciousness field outside of you. And as I said, the brain is really what navigates that. And that consciousness field can expand and be connected with the greater consciousness.
Very interesting. Very interesting. What what got you so interested in telepathy and ESP? What was the thing that kind of brought you down that road?
Yeah, because I started out as a neuroscientist and very much in the materialist reductionist model. And things changed for me when I was on faculty at Harvard. And I was called to do an evaluation of this woman who wanted to sign out of the hospital against medical advice. And that was my role there at the hospital, was to do psychiatric consults on the medical and surgical floors. And I went in to see this woman, and the staff had already determined that she was mentally ill because she said she was seeing ghosts and that she was psychic and wanted to leave. And in my training, that's what I was taught is a sign of somebody being psychotic. And when I went in to see her, one of the first things she said to me is, "Oh, I'm seeing all these ghosts, and it's freaking me out. I really want to leave." And I said, "Well, yeah, I imagine if there's going to be ghosts anywhere, they'd be in a hospital. A lot of people die here." And she goes, "Yeah," she goes, "and I'm also psychic, and I know my tests are going to come back normal." And back then, we did blood work in order to find out if somebody had a heart attack, and it took a day or two to get the results back. And so we didn't have those results back yet. And she said, "So I want to leave." And I said, "Well, I really love to talk to you a little bit more about this." And I really wanted to just gain her cooperation to stay rather than just sign the paperwork and commit